What's up, everybody? Fearon here, and today we are going to look to go over an overview of how I think about building siege defenses at a G3 level and how you can take some of these tips and apply them to any level of gameplay that you're at. Let's get into it. Here are the things that I think are most important for building G3 quality siege defenses, or just looking to up your game in whatever level siege you currently play. Commit your best runes, understand what variance is, make sure you're building to speed ticks, and that you have the correct turn order on your team. And lastly, going to do a little bit on how to maximize your artifacts for defense. So first, I said you want to commit your best runes to defense. Your defenses will be hit many times per siege, and you'll be using an offense monster once, maybe twice if you rune swap it. You're really doing your guild a disservice if you're not committing your best runes to defense. And then within your defenses, you want to prioritize frontline, which is going to be the 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, the first towers that are open at the beginning of the map. What we're going to call push towers, the things that you're going to put on the enemy's towers that you take on the first round. And then after that, you can kind of go inwards. And again, your frontline towers are most likely to be hit the most, so you want to have your best defenses in there. Next, we want to understand something called variance. Basically, the idea here is that if you're running an entire tower of Sierra, Orion, Perna, that comp is interesting because it can be built many different ways. You can have a Swift Orion with a speed lead and go for an outspeed and nuke on someone. You can go a fast but violent Orion, assuming that someone's going to take in a bruiser offense. And even though you won't necessarily be super fast with a Swift set, you can be fast enough to still go first, and then you have the extra turn cycling from Violent on the Orion to do a lot of damage to your team. And so the idea here is that you want to keep the enemy guessing as much as possible. You don't want them to go into this tower and say, oh, it's all Violent Orions, just outspeed, just Lucian, and do whatever. And if they have to either guess, or if they assume that it's one thing and then you end up having them hit into a different version of that team, it's an easy way for you to get wins or burn more premium counters on the opponent. And lastly, variance is only as good as what other people are doing as well. So if you're building your towers, look at what the other builds are that your guild is making. If you have a full tower of Swift Orions, then you can get away with building a violent one, assuming that the enemy is going to be thinking that you have a lot of Swift units in that tower. You will have a better chance if yours is different. Next, we want to understand the counters for the team that we're building. So we're going to continue with the idea or the example of Sierra, Orion, Perna. One very common to that is if you know you can outspeed it, people will do something like Carcano, Tion, Lucian. You Lucian the Sierra and the Orion, and the Carcano is able to clean up the Perna afterwards. So if you know that this is a common thing that someone might build into it, you don't have to beat everything that can be taken into your team, but you want to commit to a certain style of offense and counter it well. For example, if you build a really, really fast Orion, but you don't speed tune your team to that Swift Orion, or you don't build high damage on your Sierra and your Perna, it doesn't matter if you go first, you're going to go first, and then you might get cut because your team isn't also very fast, or you just might not kill because your team is built very tankily. So you want to commit to the one style. You want someone who brings in a certain type of offense to either have, a chance of getting RNG'd, or they brought in the wrong type of offense and they just auto lose, right? So again, we know that a violent Orion will be able to be Lucianed, but this requires, good note taking or intelligence from the enemy, or they're gambling, if it's a violent or Swift. And if you can make a violent Orion, but it's insanely tanky, right? You have the Orion with minus win and plus 25k health, and you have the same thing on a Sierra. They'll still go first. They knew someone else told them that it was a violent Orion. They're going to try and go first. But if they try and Lucian it and yours has enough tankiness, you will live and then be able to clean up the enemy team. So again, the main idea here is know what type of teams people will take into your team. Think of a particular archetype of that offense and build to counter something specific. Next, we're going to talk about tick brackets. So This is a very complicated topic that I don't want to go into too deep in this video. I'll put a link in the description for some good resources for understanding speed ticks, but the general idea is that there are breakpoints in the game for the amount of speed that your unit has that correlates to how often they get turns. So the numbers here you can see here between 9 and 3, there's more ticks here, but these are the more common speed breakpoints that you'll build towards because they're, you know, speed that is semi-attainable, although I don't know if you're really looking to build a 477 speed unit. What it means is that every 9 in-game speed ticks, so the game is basically saying, hey, 1 unit of time has passed, your unit will go, right? And you can see that there's a pretty big open space here between some of these ticks. The most common ones that we see in high-level Siege are the 6 and the 5 tick, which is the 239 and the 286 tick. But imagine you build a unit that is 275 combat speed. You essentially have like 35 wasted speed and stats because as long as your turn order is correct, after that first placement of turn order happens, that additional speed is doing nothing for your unit, and you'd be better off removing some speed from the unit and putting more other stats onto it. Again, there's going to be some exceptions to this rule. You might purposely build mid-tick on a certain unit in order to try and cut an enemy team or to stop a certain offense from working. But in general, you want to commit to 1 tick for your team and build everyone towards that, again, to maximize the stats that you're getting for your units. The next most important thing is thinking about what sets should you actually put on your units. So we want to think about if someone knows what the sets are, you know, someone goes in, they lose, and then they come back in, or they're clearing a tower for the second time, will intel against your team make it very easy to clear. So again, another example with Sierra Orion Perna is if you have the Perna off will, then a Swift Ganymede is very dangerous to your team, especially if they know that all 3 of your units are off will. They're able to just bring in a Swift unit that has a 113 base speed versus your Orion's 106. So they have a 7 speed advantage there to outspeed, and they can just reset the Perna and not have to deal with that second life. Secondly, Destroy is extremely important in this Siege meta. If you basically are running any sort of healer on your Siege defense, you want to find a way to fit a Destroy set somewhere into your team. This is going to make the difference between someone who can take a slow and confident team versus them having a timer against how long they have before they're just going to lose to Destroy battle. And also you'll see certain teams where it allows kill pressure to open up after a couple of rounds have passed, where potentially your team is tanky enough that at full HP, it's not going to be in danger of dying, but once Destroy is taken down to 80%, then a proc from an enemy Kinky or Ainu or Suki or something like that is very dangerous to your team. And again, when in doubt, Violent Will is never bad, or I should say rarely bad. There's a lot of sets that are useful, but again, if you're not sure what to run, Violent on defense is always very, very, very good. And remember that you are committing your best sets, so make sure that you're understanding how to fit the best runes that you can onto your defense and fit that within your teams. I'll also say that there's certain teams that the offset is not as important, but let's say that you have a Perna you want to build and you have an insane Nemesis attack slot 6 that just fits Perna really well. Build Bionem. Make sure it's not something that like everyone is doing on your guild, so you're not, you know, opening yourselves up to easy counters, but a lot of places just having those insane runes that are on your count on offsets on certain units can also make a big difference in just the efficiency and the quality of the monster that you're able to build. Then within that, turn order and tight tuning is really important. So I'm going to give a different defense example here. Ainu Suki Molly is a very common 4-star defense that we're seeing, and a lot of times I see this team not tuned correctly. And what I mean by that is that you really want to have the Suki before the Ainu, and then the Molly first also, if possible. The reason here is that you want to optimize your kill pressure as well as just like good AI decisions by your team. So this does a couple of things. If someone brings in a comp that has CC in it, Molly going first will always be able to cleanse your damage dealers before they go. So if it was Suki and then Molly, right, you might have a stun up on your Suki, they lose their turn and then Molly goes, right? Whereas if Molly went first, it would have been able to cleanse that Suki before its turn and it won't lose that turn. Secondarily, this is not like a high percentage play, but again, in defense, you're not building for 100%, you're building to luck stack a win here or there. Molly skill 1 also has strip, so having a stripper in front of your damage dealing units that have debuffs is also incredibly useful. Then next, we want to have the Suki go second because Suki has the attack break, or the defense break on skill 1. And then Ayunu is another big damage dealer with the skill 2, which can be a closer or a kill confirm from your team. So the things that can happen here is, for example, if the enemy has a unit that is tanking the Suki but not the Ayunu, then the Suki skill 1, if it procs a defense break, can also change the AI of the Ayunu, pulling him off of a water unit onto a fire unit, for example, if it's low enough, or onto anything that the defense break will be enough to change the AI. Can be really good for getting wins and doing unpredictable things to an offense. Lastly, you want to make sure that your units are as close in speed as it makes sense. You don't want to have to sacrifice stats or sets in order to get everything 1 speed apart, but it's much scarier, especially in this team, to have the Suki and the Ainu go like back to back with 1 speed gap, because just again, the times that you see losses are the things where like the Suki gets the defense break on the first hit of its skill 1 and gets the second attack into that defense break. The Ainu does a skill 2, almost kills your unit, and then procs and skills 1s, and that's why you lose, right? But let's say if they have like a 30 speed gap between them, the Suki does a skill 1 defense break, you're taking in some comp with a cleanse, it goes in between the Suki and the Ayunu, you're able to heal up your unit, cleanse the defense break, and you didn't even get close to dying when the Ayunu procs even 2 times, right? So having those units, again, closer in speed allows for more combo potential and less chance that the enemy is able to disrupt that damage cycle and get a heal or some sort of disruption off. All right, next we're going to talk about artifacts. I think artifacts are extremely under-optimized for most people, and even if you're not farming a ton of artifacts, some lower rolls on these useful substats can go a long way in terms of how good your defense will do. And in general, for left side, we're going to prioritize plus or minus damage dealt or taken from an element, and then after that, additional damage depending on the unit. So first of all, if your unit that you're building artifacts for is going to be the focus target of any sort of offense, a great example of this is almost any Vigor 4-star defense. Vigor is the kill target because that speed buff is so impactful. You want to take damage reduction from what will be taken into you. So again, for the Vigor example, minus damage taken from wind is incredibly useful, and I think one of the most important things to take on that side. Second, if you're a damage dealer and it's likely that there's going to be a element on the offense that you are going to be focused into, for example, a fire unit going into a wind unit, and you think that's likely, then raw plus element is going to give you the most increased damage on that unit. Next, if you have a damage dealer unit who is unlikely to be tanked, so my example here is we have Theo, Sager, Escher is something we're seeing, and it's hard to bring a dark tank into this team because you have the wind and the water damage from Theo and Sager, so it's just not very likely, and it's more common that the Escher is just going to be kind of hitting whatever. Then additional damage is much more useful because you're not going to have that consistent damage multiplier from a plus element. And then again, when in doubt, minus element is always great if you have nothing else to run here against the weak element for your unit. On the right side, in general, recover and accuracy are really great, as well as additional damage or CD to skill. I think in general, though, people tend to overvalue CD on a specific skill, but it can still be pretty valuable on that side. As far as accuracy goes, if you have a unit that only needs accuracy on one skill, this is a really strong place to pick it up in artifacts. You're going to have tons of efficiency from being able to get, 20 accuracy skill 3 versus in artifacts versus getting it on runes. But if you have a unit that needs multiple skill accuracy, and my example here is going to be Changpeng. Changpeng, all 3 of his skills want accuracy, and while 2 and 3 are more important, I find it much better in these cases to find that stat in runes, right? Because one roll of accuracy is 8% in a rune versus to get 8% of accuracy again in all 3 skills that you need it on in artifacts is going to be 6% basically times 4, right? To get that same value, you need 4 rolls on the artifact. So again, if you need it on one skill, maybe two, then it's great to get in artifacts. Otherwise, try and find that in runes. Then also here, speed and defense with HP is low on tanks or support units can also be useful, but just keep in mind that speed is HP and low will break the turn order and speed tuning of your team. So again, keep that in mind. All right, to finish this off, we're gonna go through one example defense that I built. These are the 4 defenses that I'm currently running for my guild. But I think Sierra Orion Perna is the thing that's pretty ubiquitous across all levels. So I'm actually going to show defense runes for this team, as well as talk through my thinking about how I built my own Sierra Orion Perna. So starting from the top of my list, the first thing I did was I looked at what other people in my guild were running, and I wanted to pick a specific type of team to beat. So I noticed that we had a lot of pretty tanky, violent Orions that were also fast. So I decided to start with thinking about a Swift Orion. So we decided to go Swift Will on this unit for 2 reasons. One, I just have a couple of really fast Will runes with accuracy that fit the build. And secondarily, when you're running a Swift Orion, the biggest weakness you have is either someone who's going to run a faster unit or someone who's going to bring in a Leo into you. So if someone brings a Leo into my comp, the Orion is still on Will, which stops the Leo from being able to push back the Orion. And my Orion should still go first after that Leo goes. Continuing to look at this Orion build, a couple of things that I'll call out. He's kind of hard to put artifacts on because, again, he needs accuracy on multiple skills with skill 2, skill 3, although we're okay to build towards a mid-range skill 2 accuracy and a high accuracy on the skill 3. So the first thing I prioritized was finding enough accuracy in runes, and then throwing on, we have a skill 3 accuracy plus 21 in artifacts, which puts us at the 85 accuracy cap for this skill. That's the most important. I don't know why we rolled skill 1 crit damage on him. We probably would have been better off with a skill 2 accuracy here. And also you can notice that I took an attack main support artifact. Again, we're going first most of the time on this. And because I'm building a fast Orion, I'm not going to be anti-Lucian or anti-Cleave. So if I do get outsped, we're not worried about those tanky stats. We're just mostly worried about the skill 3 accuracy, the highest thing that I could get. On the left side, we looked for this speed proportional to lost HP with an HP main stat and a little bit of damage reduction, not the highest rolls. But again, the idea here is that this Orion cycling is going to be the most annoying thing from this team. And then secondarily, there are some cleaves that will outspeed, but they rely on going 2 turns. For example, like a Jamira Light Homie team, and having the speed proportional lost HP can make it so that after the first time you get hit, if you don't die, the Orion can actually cut due to a large speed increase from that effect. Then also one thing that I'll point out about Orion, this is like a very minor thing, but the ideal Orion for defense is actually you're looking to max the skill 3, so it gets that cooldown. And then you actually, if you can, you don't want to max this skill 2. And the idea here is that this max skill 2 brings the cooldown down to a 3-turn cooldown, where the skill 3 is the most impactful thing from the Orion. So if you can get the AI into using the skill 1 more to have that extra 20% vial proc chance to get back into the skill 3, I think that's more impactful than having an extra turn cooldown on the AoE defense break. So now that we've decided we're going to run a Swift Orion, this kind of changes 2 things about how I build the rest of these units. First, I'm not as worried about building Will on my Sierra and my Perna. Again, there's still the chance of something like a Swift Ganymede, but we're putting one of our best Swift sets on our Orion, so we're decently confident that we're going to be pretty quick for most of these. We still might get outsped by like a Jin Dova, or any sort of high speed lead with a high base speed race unit, or anyone who has like a Sylvia or something like that. Like, yeah, we're definitely going to get outsped. But our main win condition is either outspeeding someone and snagging a kill, or going first and just getting some procs, having some sort of RNG that gets us that extra damage into a more tanky team. So we're deciding that we're going to go off Will for our Sierra and Perna as a result. And also we want to make sure that we actually tune towards this Orion speed boost. So you can do this via swap, or there's some other online calculators for how to make sure that when you have the 30% of the boost, as long as you go first, you want to make sure that your Sierra and your Perna are uncuttable. One other thing that we thought about here too was the turn order. We obviously want the Orion to go first. And then I think between Sierra and Perna, this is a little bit of a minor nit that isn't like super likely to happen, but we did tune the Perna in front of the Sierra for some case where they have a unit that could get stripped by the Perna into a bomb from the Sierra. This is only likely to happen on a wind unit when there's not a water unit on the field. So again, very unlikely, but we ended up kind of making that micro decision there. So the Perna here is also violent, fairly fast, again, because we're tuning it towards that higher speed tick, the 289 bracket with the speed lead, and then also making sure that we're tuned to the boost of the Orion. We're going a pretty heavy damage build. This is not a very tanky Perna for G3. And then we took single target crit damage and skill 1 crit damage on our right side artifact, just pure damage. And on the left side, we looked for just the biggest plus damage delta on wind that I could find. It also has a little bit of add damage, a little bit of add damage delta on fire, and CD as enemy HP is high as well. Lastly, we have the Sierra, again on the higher speed tick to make sure we're boosting into it with the Orion. We have not the highest attack. We're a little bit more of a Bruiser Sierra build here. But we have lots of additional damage and artifacts, a little bit of bomb damage and artifacts as well, and decently high accuracy. So a lot of teams that will go into the Sierra Orion Perna that Bruiser it will end up focusing this Sierra down first. So we're looking for a little bit of a balance between doing a lot of damage with artifacts, not as much damage with the bombs, but able to survive quite some time with decent defense and pretty high HP. So there we go. That's my Sierra Orion Perna, how I built it and what I prioritized. Hope this was useful for you all, and hope you enjoyed the video. And again, I'll see you in the next one.